Welcome, everyone. We have another episode of The Platform here. I'm your host, Johnny Dallas, CEO and co-founder of Zeet. And today we've got Baruch Sadogursky, who's going to be talking with me about platform engineering, titles in DevOps, and a million things in between. Baruch, to get us started, would love to hear more about, who are you? How did you get into DevOps? You've been at JFrog, you've been at Gradle, you've had a million developer relations titles. Tell us a little bit about your experience and your journey into developer experience.
Johnny, thank you for having me. Very excited to be on the podcast. My name is Baruch. I'm a developer advocate at Gradle right now. Probably will have some witty, funny title like I used to have in JFrog when I was chief sticker officer, because that was an important part of the job, giving away stickers. Doing developer relations for the longest time. I think about 12 years now. Started the entire thing of developer relations with JFrog, being their first and only developer advocate for 7 years, 8 years. Before that, I was a developer for another decade. And with JFrog, we kind of pivoted from being a tool for developers for a tool that enables DevOps. And that was a very interesting journey, as now, after more than a decade in DevOps, we kind of realize that maybe we still aren't sure what it really is, how it should work. Everything between DevOps engineers, SREs, and platform engineers. And now with Gradle, I kind of come full circle back into the midst of developers, because you probably heard of Gradle as a build tool for the JVM ecosystem. But not only the Gradle, the company also there's a tool that called now Gradle Enterprise, which is not the best name because it's not only Gradle and it has very little to do with enterprise. That's another run for another time. But generally, it's a great tool to facilitate developer productivity engineering discipline, which is also something that has a lot to do with DevOps, and it's very interesting to explore.
Yeah, I love that you're calling out a couple of these different titles that are all floating around each other in this space: developer productivity, developer experience, DevOps, platform engineering, SRE, all different things that to different people mean different things and can get bundled under the same umbrella sometimes. And we'll dig into that in a moment. I think one question for you, as you've kind of navigated this for some decades now, what draws you to these categories: developer experience and developer relations and DevOps? What pulls you in?
So I think all of them have in common the success of the engineer. It's true for DevOps. This is where we started, how to make engineers, namely ops, be more successful. It's true for developer productivity engineering. This is what the whole category is about, helping engineers to be more productive and successful. And this is also what developer relations is about. In the end of the day, the end goal of developer relations is making developers more successful. And I think this is the perfect blending of my passion for technology and my passion to people. This is where it all meets in helping people being more successful. Once with DevOps, second time with developer productivity engineering, and with developer relations underneath. It kind of all comes together. I never thought about it, and it's boom, how everything works together.
I love that. I love the way you describe that of, it's technology and people coming together, because that's, I think, one of the better explanations of what DevOps really should be, or kind of where all these ideas spring out of. Fundamentally, it's about, let's help developers in their job. Let's make them easier to do what they're trying to get done. Let's make them faster. Let's make them more efficient. Let's make them have to worry about less. And how we do that has changed a lot over time, and will continue to change a lot over time, whether it's throw it over the wall, or it's integrated DevOps teams, or it's platform engineering teams, and then using software to different degrees. But fundamentally, let's help devs. Let's make them do the work that they're trying to do more effectively. They're creative people. It's why we like to build things. Engineers are fundamentally kind of like artists. Let's help them do that work.
I completely agree. In the end of the day, developers or engineers in general are the rainmakers. They are those who create whatever the industry sells, consumes, uses, and what's not. In the end of the day, it's about written code that was built and eventually deployed. So whoever build this code, write this code, build this code, and deploy the code are the people who make the entire engineering, the entire industry exist.
Yeah.
And this is where all of us should put the effort to make those people more successful, because this is how we all thrive.
And that's what I love about infrastructure specifically, right? It's never the sexiest thing to a lot of people. The plumbing, the infrastructure, the stuff that's under the street, but it's how the city works. It's very important, very critical, and it touches every piece of the world that's being built. So we've talked about a couple of these titles, and I think titles are always a touchy subject in DevOps because they're changing all the time. And I think you've mentioned a couple of these different industries or categories. One of your presentations recently was about there's kind of inadvertent silos that get created with teams. When someone says DevOps team, that really doesn't mean anything. Can you tell us, what do you mean by a DevOps team, or what should a DevOps team mean? Does it even make sense for the term?
I have an obsession, and that's my holy war against the term DevOps engineer. And it's not a thing, and it's a hill I'm willing to die for, because it not only, a lot of people reply to me, well, that's just semantics, who cares how they call, but actually naming things have consequences, because naming things, in the end of the day, impacts the behavior of people who, in some point, interact with those titles. DevOps was originally, in the beginning, about a collaborative methodology, right? The whole idea of DevOps, if we read the Phoenix project, if we read the DevOps handbook, if we watch those early presentations by Patrick Dubois and who's not, it was about how we put together dev people and ops people in empowered teams, and they work together, achieving a common goal. When you take someone and call them DevOps engineer, you kind of excuse everybody else from doing DevOps. Because we have DevOps engineers, it's their job. Then we take all those DevOps engineers and put them together, because it obviously makes sense in organizational or organization-wise. And then we have the DevOps team. And look and behold, we created a silo. Next thing we know, developers throw their work over the fence to the DevOps team to make sure that it goes to production. And the only thing that changed is that instead of WebSphere, we now have Kubernetes. And that's a debatable improvement, if at all. Next thing you know, smarter people will start thinking how we tear down the silo between dev and DevOps. Maybe it's worth having a collaborative methodology. Let's call it DevDevOps.
And then, of course, that DevDevOps team, they need some support. Let's call them DevOps Ops.
DevOps Ops engineers. So this is how after 12 years we are back in square one, and no one really sees those empowered teams that try to bridge the divide between dev and ops. And this is obviously on us. This is on us by talking about the collaborative practices, but actually neglecting the engineering aspect of DevOps. There was a void. People rushed into this void and make their own decisions, ended up with DevOps engineers. And it's not that no one tried, right? If you look at the term Site Reliability Engineer, SRE, and you look at the effort that Google put into conveying the message that SRE implements DevOps. And I don't know, you probably saw it. There is, and a lot of people saw, there is an entire video series of Liz von Jones with Seth Wargo trying to explain to the industry what it actually means. SRE implements DevOps. That SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, is the engineering discipline that helps laying the technical foundation for DevOps to thrive in the organization, and that helps with the technical minutia of how ops and dev people come together and deliver software faster together. The problem is, in my opinion, it didn't pick up. Yes, we see those SRE engineers here and there, but when you ask people who do that, who set up Kubernetes cluster in their organization, and you ask them, who are you? They will tell you, we are DevOps engineers. And you will tell them, hey, no, you are actually, you cannot be DevOps engineers. DevOps is a collaborative practice. There is no collaboration engineer. You cannot be DevOps engineer. Instead, there is a term for what you are doing, that site reliability engineer. They will be very upset with you because when people hear site reliability engineering, they think about very specific and narrow scope of maintaining a website and its uptime, which is ridiculous because originally site was like an engineering site and not a website. But when we mention site in our daily life, we usually mean a website. And this is stupid how this tiny detail of misunderstanding caused us to lose our way in our DevOps journey as an industry. How absurd is that? But this is where we are now.
That's exactly right. And, site reliability engineer, it's broad. Like, keeping the site reliable is not just, the web server is responding. It means dependencies to that. It means deeper tracking, observability. Like, it's no easy task to keep a site reliable, especially in kind of today's age of microservices and more complex web apps. It's not a small job.
But by the sound of it, it's exactly the opposite. And I personally know organizations who have SREs, site reliability engineers, and their entire job is monitoring that the website is up. Because this is how they understand their job and their bosses understand their job. And then on top of that, they have the DevOps engineers who do the real DevOps engineering job, whatever it is, the ops job actually, right? And when I ask them, hey, people, how ridiculous is that? It doesn't make any sense. They're like, no, it makes perfect sense. Site reliability is about checking that the website is up. DevOps engineering is about Kubernetes and stuff, right? It's absurd, but this is where we are now. And seeing the rise of platform engineering kind of gives me a lot of joy, because I think that now, finally, we have the term that describes the technical engineering aspect of the ops side of DevOps.
I like the way you phrase that, and I like the way you kind of phrase this whole conversation, in that it really comes from naming, right? We talk about naming as one of the hardest things in engineering, of naming variables and naming classes and keeping those consistent, but it applies to org design as well. How you name different job functions, how you name different organizations is going to create silos over some period of time, and that's going to determine how people operate in kind of a few years from now, or even months. And even, when you talk about site reliability engineer, I love the call out you made a moment ago of site means something different today. Today, when we say site, we mean website, or that's kind of the implicit understanding that anyone would have. But kind of when that term was created initially, an engineering site was a very specific engineering concept, and that's not the same thing as a website, and those have changed. I'm a really big fan of some of the tenets that are similar to, I think, you. Big fan of some of the tenets that are backing up this new platform engineering wave. This idea of use software and have engineers that are creating foundational bits, building blocks, components, modules, pick your poison and terminology once again. But you're building these building blocks, making sure that they're high quality golden paths, have all the operational nuances encoded into them, and then delivering those to the end developers who are going to be using them. And one thing I really like about that is it scales with new technologies coming out. We're going to have site change definitions again. We're going to constantly have newer and newer pieces of what this broad DevOps category means that come out over time. I mean, even today, the AI and ML world is all the rage right now. Everyone's talking about it, and I think there is new problems that haven't really been thought about in terms of model serving or distributed GPUs. There is going to be some new industries that emerge that are going to fall into the DevOps category eventually that are related to that, and we can't predict them today. We need a model for how we treat these operational problems and how we treat this collaborative model that is going to scale to new technologies. And it feels like platform engineering is in that right direction today, I'd say, of really focus on treat your infrastructure, treat your operations as a product problem, have a software platform that hits on all these bits, and have operators and designers of this platform that can collaborate in standard defined ways. But I'm curious, do you think that platform engineering is the answer to this DevOps problem? Is it going to fall into the same spot as SRE in a few years? Is there something else that's coming out that should be the new way?
I'm frankly very glad of the rise of platform engineering, because I think for the first time we kind of get this equation of what DevOps is in order. And it never happened even in the early days of DevOps. DevOps was, well, still is, a concept that ops people came up with to make their life easier, right? It's almost like there is nothing for developers to gain out of it. They used to have a very easy life, writing their code, throwing over the fence and go home. Suddenly they have more responsibilities with DevOps. Definitely not their idea of good time. And you can look at the founding fathers of DevOps. All of them are ops people. But it's a fact that DevOps ops people came up with it to make their life easier, and that's okay. There is nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is trying to convince developers that they need it. I mean, in the end of the day, business needs it. So everybody just get on board, or don't let the door
one way or another
hit them on their way out, right? But there is, particularly in the original idea of DevOps, there is not much for developers to gain, except of the global concepts of doing the right thing, doing their work better, making sure that their product gets to the whoever in the end of the day matters, and that's the users. And obviously most of the developers understand that, want that, appreciate that, and will get on board with DevOps of the understanding that until their product is deployed, their job is not done. But obviously it wasn't their idea for the obvious reasons. Now, with platform engineering and clear vision that, yes, we have this DevOps as a common framework of collaboration, but we also need very clear technical implementation of ops and very clear technical implementation of dev. It's not merged, it's not one of the same thing. It's not this mythical DevOps engineer who knows both ops and dev. There is nothing of that. It's very clear. Yes, in the end of the day, our ideas work together. To make this happen, there are technical engineering requirements like Kubernetes, like data engineering pipelines, which is a completely different thing, but it's exactly the same concept of ops engineering implementation. And we have the development engineering implementation, which obviously is writing the most efficient code, being the most productive in writing efficient code that actually works. And when we have this DevOps vision based on those two legs that are very clear, that both of them are engineering practices, very clear engineering practices, and we understand what we are talking about. And there are obviously more. There are not just two. It's very clear that there are more. There is a leg for quality assurance. And that's also, we have the broader concept of how it works together with dev and ops. We know we don't need to have another silo. We know it shouldn't be on the way of our release. But there is also very practical engineering aspects of that. How do we automate as much test as possible? How do we use this framework and that? How the security fits into testing? Is it a separate DevSecOps, whatever you like, or it's just the same matter of just checking for other things? There is also a product. It's also part of the big picture. How do we incorporate product into the discussion of DevOps? And there is also very clear engineering legs on that of how do we provide the right product feedback or requirements to the right people in the right time. When we look at that from this way, platform engineering falls perfectly in its place, and it doesn't try to interfere or replace other engineering aspects that all of them, in the end of the day, comprise this technical implementation of DevOps, which is still a collaborative practice.
I like the way you described that, right? Like this platform engineering model really is an operating model more than it is a point solution. Even in just kind of that description you gave there, you called out two areas that, depending on the size of your company or kind of what you're building, may or may not be involved. DevSecOps is kind of a new term, or not even new anymore, but that's not DevOps. Some people call it DevOps, some people call it DevSecOps.
It's another not a thing, by the way.
Yeah, it's another adjacent field, right? Like security is definitely involved with development. Security is definitely involved with infrastructure, but it's not the same thing. And how do we have some common language for these teams to interact and speak to each other and make sure these business outcomes are achieved without stepping on each other's toes or falling into these silos once again? You also called out data pipelines. We through the work that we do at Z, we help a bunch of teams build developer platforms in different capacities. And really, every one of them is different. It depends on your company. It depends on your scale. It depends on your requirements. It depends on what you're building. Some teams we've seen say data pipelining. Oh, that's part of DevOps. That's op people's job. Other companies, data is really critical to their business. Data is a big part of it, and they have a data team. Maybe even they have a data ops team. We're talking about AI and ML. Maybe you have an ML ops team. These are going to change depending on your industry, your company size, a million different factors. And platform engineering is broad in the same way DevOps is, but it actually proposes some technical answers and concrete solutions to how can these miscellaneous multivariate teams interact with each other, which I think is pretty exciting. I do think it is interesting, right? One thing around titles is fundamentally the people doing the work are humans, right? And we all have ego around what we're called, and it can impact things like pay ranges. I saw recently there was a conversation where a lot of SREs don't want to be called SREs anymore. And the big reason for that is SREs aren't paid as much as platform engineers. And so they're like,
because they are just keeping the website up. Why would they get it? Exactly?
Yeah, it sounds like a small role, a platform engineer. Okay, that's an engineer. And you're developing this whole platform that powers
the entire
everything.
platform.
I mean, it's the backbone of my company. That's a critical role. I got to 10x their salary. It feels like,
so
this is another new title swap over.
It's insane because in the end of the day, they were supposed to be the exact same thing. They were supposed to be the engineering implementation of the ops side of DevOps. Yeah. Then this is my entire rant. It's about that. It's about how title was important and how we failed previously seeing that the engineering implementation of DevOps deserve a title in the first place, how DevOps engineer is a terrible idea, and how SRE was unfortunately not the best pick, not necessarily because what it meant was wrong, but because of how it came across. Another part of this engineering implementation is for me what makes the developers productive, right? So we just spoke about what makes the ops productive. And that's the entire concept of platform engineering in that, right? So in the end of the day, you come up with an awesome platform to make sure that ops, as in operations, happens as productive as possible. And this is what all the DevOps framework, the DevOps, the DORA report, the Accelerate book, all this body of knowledge is about efficient ops, right? If you look at the metrics of the DORA report, it will be mean time to delivery, it will be time to recover, it will be failure rate. All those concepts are how good your platform is in delivering software to production and recovering from issues that happen during this process.
And it's all with the assumption that, these operations are bottlenecking developer productivity, and that impact your kind of company's iteration speed or the success of your business. But very much agree, it's focused on operations more than focused on developers.
Now, what about developer productivity? And that's exactly the point. How do we make now the developers that deliver this code to the point from which the DORA metrics start? And if you look at the description of them, they're very clear. It's how successful you are after your code being pushed. It's literally said that. But what about what happens before your code gets pushed? Right. What about the productivity of engineers while they envision the code, while they run the code, while they try to get a feedback of whether they come up with is good or not, and while they prepare their code to be shipped to production? And this is another pillar of engineering DevOps implementation that I feel was neglected for many years. Right. So if you look back at your IXDC comics, I'm not slacking off, my code is compiling. It was always like something that is given, that the feedback loops on the code that we write are broken, that the tests will fail and we will just ignore them, that some tests will be flunky and we will just leave as that our the code that we write won't get the best support from whatever IDE or virtual assistants that we use with. And what we see right now is a change in this aspect as well that makes me, as someone who tries to make people effective and productive, as we started with, very, very happy. And this is the biggest reason why I joined Gradle, because I think they pioneer the whole concept of developer productivity engineering. And as opposite to developer productivity, which we heard a lot, especially with COVID, working remotely, burnout, and all this stuff, which is much more in developer productivity management. Developer productivity engineering gets me excited because it's about engineering. And that's what platform engineering does to ops, developer productivity engineering does to dev. Because this is where we make sure that the developers are as much productive as they are before we get to the second part of the pipeline, which is what platform engineering takes care of.
Gotcha. So I hear you kind of describing this world in the future where you see platform engineering and developer productivity both living adjacent to each other. I think one of the difficulties of naming, once again, I think, and one that we hear a lot about is platform. Definitely a much better word than DevOps, but it still has its fair share of homonyms and things to get confused for. There's the platform as a service space, right? These services that are one-stop shops for developers to come and do all of their infrastructure operations. I think Heroku really defined the space, but now there's Netlify and Vercel and a million others that are focused on different types of development. And these platform as a service companies are very focused on developers. They aren't really catering to ops. You can't go in and customize them. You can't go in and configure them. It's very much, how do we give you a clean developer experience, from feedback loops to helping you share out your URLs and preview, to clean logs and manage the ICD, GitHub integrations, and a million convenience features that make the developer experience a really pleasant experience. Platform as a service is kind of span both these lines, right? It's I've heard some people describe them as, this is a platform engineering in a box. You can't customize it, but imagine their company is basically your platform engineering team. They're building this platform for you. But it does touch on developer productivity. Do you think companies at scale are going to have platform engineering teams, developer productivity teams? Are they under some common umbrella, or are they completely adjacent, separate problems? There's a lot of overlap there.
I think we are now talking about another of those dangerous term confusions that we might see in the future, and it will again bite us in the ass. And that's what platform is. You can look at it both ways. You can say, well, platform is the delivery platform for software. And it's very clear that it starts in the ops side of the house. And I'm not suggesting that we have silos, but we anyway have some kind of a conveyor, call it whatever pipeline we have, in which in some point of time, there is a transition from writing software, creating software, to delivering software. And we can call the delivery part more ops, and writing, creating, getting feedback, improving software more dev. they interconnected, and there is obviously the common interface, which is DevOps, and it's all fine. But in the end of the day, those two parts of creating software, delivering software are not going away. And for me, the way I see it, platform is the delivery platform. And developer productivity engineering is the developing part of the house. I want to kind of stress here that DevOps was never about losing specialization. DevOps was always about deeply specialized people that have this broad view, those T-shaped people that have a broad view on what's going on, but also they have the leg of the T with their deep specialization working together in empowered teams. This all stays. And it all stays even if we look at the platform engineering and put them in the ops side of the house and having the developer productivity engineering looking them on the dev side of the house, it still will have the DevOps integration between them, but the specialization is very different. For the sake of an example, people who set up Kubernetes clusters are the platform engineers in my head, and people who set up those improve feedback loops and build NCI processes are the developer productivity engineering specialists. Those are completely different specializations. Those are completely different skills. And we can call them both platform, but I think we are going towards the problem that we have with DevOps engineer in this approach, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. And I certainly agree that there is different people that we're talking about here. I think in one of our previous episodes, we described this difference as there are the people who are going to be building the platform itself, this common set of, or not even the set of infrastructure packages, but the interface to these, the control plane, the central place where these can be defined. And then there's going to be a multitude of people who are actually defining what can happen in this platform. I think like the example we used back then was, say you've got a database team and you've got a product team. The database team needs to build a database module and load that into the platform. And there's a team that needs to build that platform that can support the database module and bridges that database module to the product team, who's then going to spin up databases, configure databases, consume these databases, and use it in their application. And so it sounds kind of like that team that is creating the platform itself, thinking about the user experience, thinking about what's the common interface to provide, is what you're calling developer productivity here. And the teams that are actually building the infrastructure components is more this platform engineering team. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I would say it would be fair, but again, I would be very, very careful in what we call platform, just because we are heading right there into the same conclusion that we have with site. Because, in the end of the day, everything is a platform. For me, platform engineering is very much about the delivery platform of the software, and this is where it makes sense to me. If we call everything platform, then we're right there into the problem of no one knows what it should be called and means meaningless, right? So I would say the DPE, the developer productivity engineering, there is like a DPE group that are guided by the organizational mindset of making developer productivity as excellent as it possible. And there is the platform engineering group, which is guided by the organizational mindset of making the delivery of the software as smooth as possible. And those are different expertise, and they're tackled by different skills, by different platforms. In the end of the day, having those specialized teams that are driven by the organizational mindset to excel in both will allow DevOps to actually happen. It's not a guarantee. It's not DevOps. It's a foundation, an engineering foundation, the two pillars of the engineering of DevOps that DevOps can strive on top, or maybe not, depends on, again, organizational mindset.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I certainly agree. We, like I said, naming is hard, and we're heading full tilt towards these problems every other day, right? I mean, platform engineering is certainly an improvement here, but we've got the platform as a service. I've seen some platform teams that have nothing to do with infrastructure at all, and they're actually a backend team, and they say, oh yeah, our backend service is called the platform, and that's kind of its own definition there. But those problems will always happen. I definitely think platform engineering is a step in the right direction. So you're starting to break down some of these components of what you talk about as DevOps platform. I think there's been a lot of different attempts to do that at the organizational level, at the technical level. I attended KubeCon Europe this past year in Amsterdam, and one of the hot topics there was developer portals. This kind of the UI layer to a platform, adjacent to platform engineering, but it's kind of an emerging category. I've seen some people push forward the idea of platform orchestrators. There's adjacency to CD and CI pipelines. From a technical perspective, if you were describing platform engineering to some new engineer on a team that you were working with, how would you break down the technical boundaries of a minimum platform?
So for me, one of the great things about platform engineering is about how we can well define it in a sentence or two, right? So in the end of the day, I think I already mentioned it. The automation about software delivery is what platform engineering is for me. And this software delivery can be million shapes of forms, right? It can be what we do right now, KubeCon, and what's not. Let's set up a pipeline that ends up in whatever Kubernetes runtime. Fine. This is a perfect example of platform engineering. It can be something completely different in an AI, big data, machine learning shop. The pipeline will be completely different, or there will be more of those pipelines which have to do with data and not necessarily with code. And this is also fine. But in the end of the day, the part that takes care of making sure that our delivery is automated, tested, smooth, being able to roll back, backwards and forwards compatible, you name it, all those attributes of excellent delivery, this is what platform engineering is for me.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think it's very focused on delivery there, which I love kind of your reinforcement there. And I very much agree. And every team is going to have a different platform depending on their needs. They may look the same from 1,000 feet, and maybe that's a good thing. But as you get into the weeds, they're going to look very, very different, right? Every team's going to have their own level of customization there. One exciting piece about new categories like this, or kind of new ideas or new trends in the infrastructure DevOps space, is there's a million teams at different levels of sophistication that are looking to adopt it. There are some teams who are going from 0 to 1 and saying, we are a startup, we don't really have much DevOps. We're trying to decide, should we build a DevOps team, or an SRE team, or a platform engineering team? There are banks who are going through their digital transformation planning, and they're saying, this platform engineering trend, that's kind of interesting. Should we hop on this, or should we go with the proven DevOps methodology? And a million people in between. Do you see any tools or methodologies that are kind of coming up in the space that you would recommend or you would look to if you were going about the process of, I need to build a platform at, say, some company that already has some mature DevOps team? Or is it very much like how would you start, I guess, the question here? If you decide, I want to build a developer platform, how do I do that?
So I think by now, if we're taking those cookie cutter vanilla project, I just want to roll out another piece of software that will end up with some microservices architecture ended up on the web with front and back. I think by now we pretty much have a very standard way that it needs to be done. And we have all the right tools, more than plenty, that you can pick. If we are talking about the delivery part of the house, we probably need some kind of CI server with decent support for pipelines that will eventually go and roll it out into production with containers and probably Kubernetes on this platform or another. Maybe you don't need all that. Maybe all you need are a bunch of Lambdas. Maybe it's the other way around and you need much more significant backend engineering. In the end of the day, the tools are, for me at least, much less fascinating than the processes and the culture. Just because, I don't know, I guess I wasn't this way 10 years ago. I was much more excited about frameworks and tools that I am now, probably just getting old. They're just tools. Go ahead, pick whatever you like, whatever shiny toy, and if it doesn't work, replace it with something else. And it was OpenShift, and now it's Kubernetes, and tomorrow it's going to be something else. And I'm old enough to say back in the day it was WebLogic or Tomcat. That's fine. and tomorrow it will be something else. Fine, go with it. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have the mindset and you understand what it takes, and you have both the right technical skills to engineeringly implement all the needed pieces, and then you have the mindset to make people work together on all those engineering infrastructure pieces that you built, you're golden. And really, the tools probably ended up with container and Kubernetes right now. Fine.
I love that. I think these tools will change, and you're right. Platform engineering is a mindset. It's not a set of technologies. There's kind of no vendor or owner who can own platform engineering as a whole. It's a mindset. It's a concept. One benefit that we've heard from a lot of teams who are adopting platform engineering is actually to that exact point, that they can change technologies in the future by creating these building blocks or abstracting to this kind of higher level of abstraction, giving devs these simpler interfaces as to how they work. You can make technology swaps in the future. We were speaking with one team recently that went in and has implemented a level of developer platform for a couple of their product teams. And the first building block that they provided was web service. Doesn't say if it's a Lambda, it doesn't say if it's a EC2 instance, maybe it's a VM, maybe it's on-prem, maybe it's a container, who knows? The developer doesn't need to care right now for that product team. The developer just needs to know this thing will give me a working web service, a CI pipeline and networking, and it will work. And then underneath that platform engineering team, or that team who's defining what a web service means for that company, can say, today, this means a Kubernetes container and a CI pipeline, and we use Jenkins maybe for our CI offering. And in 2 years from now, they sign a massive contract with some new CI vendor. They have to move all the CI over. They update that blueprint. They update that component. They update that predefined definition to say, actually, our CI pipelines run over here now. And the devs don't even know. They don't even care. You've created not silos, but separations of concerns where the infra team can operate on the infra problems. The ops team can operate on the ops problems. The dev teams can operate on the dev problems. And while they're all deeply related, they don't have to touch each other. They don't have to get blocked on each other. And every team is unblocked to just kind of ship as fast as they individually can, which I think is a really durable value proposition for platform engineering. It means that it's the type of thing that can last several technology trends. We weren't kind of there in the organizational complexity or the mind share back when we were in Tomcat to develop something like platform engineering. But if we had, it could have scaled to now, right? You could have a platform today that deploys Tomcat underneath for some services or Kubernetes for others, which I think just adds some real value to much larger companies that plan to be around for 10, 20 years and need to weather the storm of innovation. There's going to be a million new technologies. They can survive that with platform engineering.
I completely agree, and those abstractions are good, and we know that from software engineering. We know that hiding the concerns, technical concerns under an abstraction is a good way to go. We know that it allows us the refactoring that we will need sooner or later, and taking those engineering practices into platform engineering, it's a very, very good sign of the maturity of this field. It also, as you mentioned, it's self-sustaining. This is how you guarantee that platform engineering is not going away, because it's a good practice, it's a proven practice that is capable of providing the infrastructure for a change for whenever it is needed.
Yeah, and I like the parallel you draw there to software engineering, because that is really fundamentally how I think about platform engineering. It's let's treat infrastructure and ops with the software engineering mindset. I think we were speaking right before this about some of my background where I built, what I guess now we would call a developer platform at my last startup as a one-man engineering team who had never done DevOps before. But I knew we had to solve these problems. These are technical problems. Let's use software to do that. Let's create automation. Let's create an interface, a CLI, a UI, and let devs as the users instead of customers as the users. It also means do user interviews with your customers. It also means track the KPIs of your developer portal or your developer platform. It is really fundamentally treat infrastructure as a product and software engineering problem, not an operational problem, which is part of why I love this move away from DevOps, where ops is so critical. It is operational tasks that you're doing underneath, but treat it like a software engineering problem, treat it like a product problem, and you can get so much further. Where we have these tons of developed philosophies and tons of developed ideologies around how to run effective product and engineering teams.
Yeah, I think we are completely on the same page here, and it also true for the other engineering concerns that we mentioned, the DPE, the developer productivity engineering, and the testing automation and testing engineering as a broader concept. All of them only benefit if they are treated as proper engineering aspects, which means applying the same concepts that we apply in software engineering, for example, encapsulation, abstractions, programmable interfaces, and what's not. It's true for all of them.
Yeah, very, very much so. I do have one question that we have to ask every person who comes on this show with us. You've done DevOps, and you've done developer productivity engineering, developer relations, and you've been kind of in this space for some time now. I feel like every experienced infrastructure operator has their fair share of war stories or horror stories. So one segment we like to do is we call it hack and horror story. We like to get, what's one hack that's helped you in your career as you've grown through these different roles and you've weathered the changes in this industry, and what's a horror story of one of the worst times that some infrastructure thing went wrong and what you learned from that.
As I mentioned before, I'm probably too old to be excited about the real technical parts of things now, and both my hacks and my horror stories will be much more about people than technology. I think the hack is remembering that there are people on the other side of technology. It's very unintuitive. When you write code, you think about code, you think about how it works, you think about how it doesn't work. But in the end of the day, if you remind yourself once in a while of how people are going to use this code, why are you writing it, it gives you an entire different perspective on a lot of what you are doing. And it's not necessarily only the end users, and obviously you are reminded that there are end users by everybody, by the entire organization, because the organization wants the end users to be successful. But it's much more. It's about your colleagues. It's about other engineers in other departments. Thinking about that will affect stuff like, how do you write comments? How do you write your summary of the pull requests? How large or small are the pull requests? How accommodating your interfaces are, because other people are going to use that. And on the platform engineering side, how easy it is for developers to understand your platform, to interact with it, to make sure that they are able to bring their code into the receiving end of your platform. And this is thinking about other people in the organization. It gives you a pause. It gives you a different perspective on engineering stuff that you do. And the horror story is exactly the same. Is not doing that. Back in the day in JFrog, we were always concerned about engineers, because engineers are our customers and users. So for us, thinking about the engineers and thinking about customers and users was always one and the same. Very rare moments when we forgot about that were the biggest failures that we had throughout my tenure in JFrog. And people might be familiar with the not perfect situation where we ended live on one of our products without speaking with the engineers enough. And it was very sad. It was very embarrassing. It was also very harmful for us in JFrog, but thinking about the damage that we did to other engineers, this is what actually makes me sad every time I think about this incident. It was an incident. No one did it on purpose. I learned from it. Obviously, the entire organization learned from it. And I think this is, those kind of failures are not less impactful than your whatever normal platform that our website is down or on Black Friday type of incidents.
I love that. It's empathy, right? At the end of the day, it's think about who's on the other side, put yourself in their shoes, and think about it from their perspective. There's always a customer, no matter what you're building, whether it's an actual end user customer paying or it's another developer on another team within your organization. or if you're, building a platform, it's all the developers, the rest of the company. There's always somebody who's going to be using what you're building. That's why you're building it. And if you don't think about how they're going to do it, you're probably going to build something wrong or hurt somebody on the process. So I love that. I think that's great advice to take throughout, or for anybody in any career, but especially applied to platform engineering. It's taking that product mindset and bring that in. Always think about who's on the other side, because you're impacting somebody somehow. Baruch, I think that's all of the all the big questions I had for you today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Anything you want to leave us on, or how can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so you can find me at jbaruch everywhere on Twitter, Blue Sky, or whatever the social media of the day is, and LinkedIn, obviously. So let's keep in touch. I would love to hear your thoughts about what we spoke about, namely how platform engineering is much better term than SRE or DevOps engineer, specifically DevOps engineer, and obviously your thoughts about DPE, Developer Productivity Engineering. We are now still learning what it means for different people, for different organizations. So if it's something that you gave a thought or is dear to your heart for any reason, I would love to connect and hear what you have to say about developer productivity engineering. Thank you very much for having me, Johnny.
It's been great to have you. And similarly, if anyone has any interest in talking more about developer productivity engineering, SRE, or how those titles fit together, or platform engineering, if you agree with what we said, love a like. If you disagree, let's talk. That sounds fun. I'm Johnny Dallas from Zeet. You can find me on Twitter or on Spotify or YouTube, where we'll be posting this. Thank you so much for coming along, Rogue. And that's all we've got for today. Thanks.